but I'm going to open up with this question actually today. So I'm going to jump in by asking for you guys' input. What does this say? Discussing in class in your textbook. What do you think? Do you think social class still exercises an influence on something like parenting style? Do you observe examples of this, whether in your own family or in what you see around you? Or do you think that society's changed so much? Okay, you'll have a better idea about what exactly that question is after a little bit. Here's a second question. Okay, so that one, do I want to lock that one right now? The reason I locked it,
it says it unlocks in an hour.
okay, yeah, just for after class. But quite honestly, I could open it. Okay, good enough. I think we're set. I got a question for you guys. I'm just going to open in just a little bit. I'll go ahead and go to the PowerPoint. But yeah, so this chapter is on socialization. You may have an idea already about what that means. Like we use that word in sometimes we use it in interacting. I need to get out during this whole COVID scare thing. I'm getting tired of being inside. I need to go out because I feel like I got to socialize. That's not the meaning of socialization here. Socialization means upbringing. It means rearing. It means raising children, right? In anthropology, you call it inculturation. You kind of dip a brand new human being into the culture so they become a member of that culture with all the beliefs and values and attitudes and so on that you expect from somebody of that culture. So that's what socialization means. Okay, so that's the theme of the chapter. Today we'll talk about some terminology, nature versus nurture as a classic issue raised by socialization. On Thursday when we get together, I want to touch base about some of the theories of development. But for right now, I got a question for you guys. Some sociologists have been researching this question. Does the way children get raised in families, do the things that parents worry about with their children, the things they discipline their children for, the things they punish their children for or reward their children, does that have anything to do with like their occupation? Does their income, does the kind of work they do, does their class, whether they're upper class, middle class, poor, working class, or whatever, does that make a difference how they raise their children? Have you ever noticed differences in the way parents do parenting depending on their social class? Or do you think that's a silly question and class doesn't have anything to do with it? Well, that's kind of my question out there. I'm curious to see what you guys all may think, what you guys all may have seen.
I feel like it does in a sense because with like class like rich people, they don't have to worry as much about I don't have to study too much, or not. I guess not study too, but just, I don't have to work as hard as some other kids would because I can get, whereas like someone in a lower class, like say they're like going to college or something, or they would be not. It would be more. I feel like they would have more habits like, okay, I have to do good, and like I guess in school, like I have to do good in school so I can do better doing this, and I feel like their parents would raise them that way because like I feel like they want the best for their kids, but sometimes they just have different mentalities, especially I feel like a different mentality can raise a kid. I forgot where I was going with this. I'm sorry.
If I can pick out, no, there are a bunch of things there that had to do with like motivation.
Yeah.
Like it's from the point of view of the kid that you were trying to think. Like, okay, so if you come from a lower class family, you were maybe you were thinking that that may light a fire underneath a kid in order to try to strive. Okay, is
Yeah.
that kind of what you're saying? To kind of
He wants to get out of the lower class so he can have nicer things.
create some kind of motivation towards upward mobility. Okay, to use a term we're going to talk about towards later in the semester. Another, I think what you were saying in, say, maybe a upper class family, the children may have, it may actually be the case, or they may believe that they don't have to work as hard because maybe at school, and maybe, I don't know, you were thinking because they're surrounded by really highly educated, bookish, you know, parents with, high-powered diplomas and so on,
Yeah.
and that kind of sinks into them or drips into them, as it were. Is that kind of that thing? Okay. Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts? They sort of that spin off of what Josh said, but I was actually thinking even more particularly of like punishment, of like disciplining, right?
Um,
Yeah, Darius.
to go off of what Josh was saying, you in a lot of upper class families, you're gonna find that the children, like he said, they're not really more intelligent. They're just exposed to a lot of more things compared to children in the lower class. So they have a lot of more tools around them. There's a lot of more people who are highly educated around them compared to lower class families where their IQ scores are very low. Their environment they're in it's very bad. Their schooling is very bad. A majority of the people around them aren't very highly educated. And to go off with like the punishing, um, most upper class children and like middle class children, their parents are going to speak to them different compared to lower class children. With their punishment, it's going to be very different compared to a lower class family where children in lower class families they don't get allowance. A lot of them they might not have their own room, so you can't really tell a child in a lower class family to go to their room compared to like middle and upper class families. They don't. There's not a lot of incentives when it comes to like that you can take away from a lower class child compared to like a middle and an upper class family. That's where you'll find a lot of physical punishment in lower class families than you do in middle and upper class families.
Ooh, that was really important. That was really good. Yeah, that's information that's would be definitely added to anything that your book provides. So thank you for that, Darius. So you were mentioning that actually you have different tools depending on where you are as a parent in the class system, right? If you got more resources and you can hand these resources out to your kids in the form of allowance or cool toys or what have you, then as a punishment tool, as a behavior modification tool, you can threaten to deprive the students of those, right? Is that what you were saying? Whereas if
Yeah,
you aren't able to offer those in the first place, your tools become much more quote unquote crude and you resort more to physical threats and harm. Is that what you're saying? Oh, that's yeah,
yeah,
a lot of sense to me. That sounds definitely right. You also brought up like the speech might differ. This actually, yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts about what Darius said, or want to jump off of what he offered here? Parenting style, like maybe ways in which parents actually talk to their kids might differ.
I feel like, yeah, the way, like different speech styles, especially for like higher, upper class, it's going to be more like they're just speaking very fluently. They're using the right grammar and stuff and all that good stuff, so that so that the child can understand what they're saying. Whereas I feel like lower, maybe even like middle class would be like more slang because um the people like I feel like it's also like the people that your parents are around, because if like the people that they work with start using different like lingo, that I feel like they're gonna bring that to the dinner table basically, and just like use a bunch of slang words that might affect the way you talk as well. Because oh, mom and dad talk like this, so I could say this.
Yeah. Very good. There's actually two different lines of research in sociology that I can think of that speak to what you just mentioned. One line of research has to do with the way in which parents speak to their child, especially with regard to, behavior modification or punishment, discipline, or what have you. And so there was research done. We're going to talk about this later in the semester as well. That suggests that the lower you are in the socioeconomic scale of things, you do use more rudimentary, more fragmented forms of speech. Okay? And that begs the question, like, is your speech just plain different? If you're an upper class person versus a lower class person, do you have just different styles of speech? Do you speak better? Do you have greater linguistic resources? Like, are you able to form more complex, utterances and so on? And I would say I'm actually split, divided, conflicted on that question. So there's some research that actually suggests that speech styles and even speech capacities might change as a function of the kind of work you do, and therefore the kind of larger social world you're a part of. Okay. Yeah. So and like I say, I'm gonna reserve some of that for towards the end of the semester, but it actually suggests research that your workplace can actually affect your style of speech in general. Okay. And so you may not actually be capable of certain kinds of grammatical formulations as a person from an upper class. I'm actually quite skeptical of that line of research, but yeah, anybody else? You have any thoughts, Des?
Yeah, I was gonna add in. I mean, I feel like when it comes to like thinking of how different social classes have better, like higher up has a better language per se, I can definitely see that when it comes to like they have more advancements at a young age to give their children, learning tutors, speech therapists and things like that at a very young toddler age. So as they're getting risen up into the world, they have all that knowledge more than people at a lower class would, because they can't afford that extra help. It's only mom teaching the kid what to say rather than having professionals come in and know the exact way how to teach the child so they can progress in the fastest way possible.
Yeah, that reminds me of what Darius had just said about the idea of just exposure in general. You're exposed to all these like people with, higher level degrees. And so you're just bathed, right? You're literally bathed in certain styles of speech, right? They're talking about different theories. They're, using fancier vocabulary and all that kind of stuff. And like you just kind of absorb that is what I think what you're getting at. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, Kate.
I also feel like, kind of going back to what Josh said originally, I feel like, if you come from a lower income family, then, you see your parents and you see your grandparents. So when you go to pick out a job, chances are if you're in a low income family and, once you grow up a little bit, you're not going to be like, I want to be a doctor. You're more going to be like, well, my mom and my grandparents, my great grandparents, they all have these, these more basic jobs. So maybe that's all I can do coming from a low income family. I don't know if that makes sense. Whereas like somebody from like from a higher class family would see, their, maybe one of their parents is, a professor, maybe one of their parents is a doctor. So they would see that and they'd be like, oh, I want to be like my mom and my dad and do those, more advanced.
Are you saying like so expectations, what you think is possible and not possible for you changes depending on who your reference group is, right? If you're living with a professor, you go, well, that's natural. Becoming a professor, okay, is just something you do, right? Whereas if you come and nobody's a professor, right? You're like, well, that's something other people do, that other people are capable of, right? That certain things seem either within your reach or outside of your reach, depending on who your associates are and what they've done. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How about either Anna or Molly? Did anything occur to you guys? Let me see if I can provoke the exact kind of thing. How about, have you ever noticed any like differences in like disciplining style, like punishment style between wealthier people and poorer people, or no?
I was gonna say that in like lower class, I feel like the parents may be like more stressed or they work all the time and maybe resort to yelling more rather than the upper class.
Okay. Yeah, and actually that part of that whole that touches on this piece of research that has been done in which people actually observe the conversational style between parents and children, how parents speak to their kids, what kind of language they use, or even how much they speak. Okay, whether they say things like, knock that off, quit your shouting, quit talking to me, I'm done talking, we're not having this conversation, versus the parent who goes, now why would you want to do something like that? You see what I'm saying? Like, so actually it turns out, and this, you guys have already been, I think, hinting at this kind of thing. People have seen a correlation between these styles of speech where the higher up you go in the income ladder, the more you hear a kind of interactional question and answer, Q&A session between the parent and the child, in which the parent is formulating these rather complex questions about the child's motivation. Why do you want to do that? Or asking the child to reflect. If you did that, how do you think that will make him feel? And so on and so forth, right? Which are really deep questions, right? What is another person's internal experience like? Could you think about that for a while, right? Versus just giving orders, right? Very quick orders, commands, reminding who's the boss. Like the child says, well, I don't want to go to bed right now. Well, you got to go to bed. Why do I have to go to bed? Because I said so, right? No reason. I'm just the authority, right? Versus maybe having a discussion about it and saying, listen, here's why we don't want to stay up so late, right? If we stay up so late, we don't get enough sleep. The next day we feel all kind of grumpy and, and we can't think well and blah, blah, right? So some of the research has shown, okay, that so-called middle class or upper class parents tend to have those kinds of give and take sessions with their children in which they ask questions and they ask the children to introspect, to look inside, to reflect on their own motivations, and then become their own boss, right? So you ask the children, now after you thought about that, what do you want to do? Oh, maybe I better go to bed, right? So the child becomes his own boss, takes himself to bed, whereas, the lower down you go, you see, yeah, Darius, I saw you.
Yeah, I was gonna say in like upper class families, you're gonna find a lot more cognitive experiences compared to lower and underclass families where it's more like dominant and controlling, where it's like you said, like, oh, you're gonna find more of like a shut up, do this.
Wow. So what do you mean by cognitive experiences? You mean like they're going to have more what going on? They're going to have more
Um, I can't really think.
yeah. I think I know what you were saying though. Rather than just hearing a directive or a command,
Yeah,
they're actually prodded into a kind of reasoning. They're asked to like
yeah,
think about things, make an argument to themselves. Is that kind of what you're into, think things
yeah,
through? Okay, rather than simply taking an order, right? Don't think about it, just do what I say.
yeah,
Yeah. Now, that actually comes back to the question of stress and time constraints. So it could be that the working class or poor parent does not have the time or the energy, okay, to undertake these rather complex kinds of exchanges with their children. They're exhausted. They've got to get to work again because maybe they're working more than one job. And so what comes out rather than this, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. Why do we want to do things this way? You just say, get dressed. I ain't got time to argue, right? So it could be that the way you put it, instead of kind of initiating a cognitive experience on the part of the child, which takes a lot of work, right? You just, I ain't got the time or the energy. Okay, we got to go. So that's actually reflected in your language, right? You simply give these what's called imperatives. Do this, do that. Okay, why? I ain't giving you a reason. I'm just the authority. Anna, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that has to do with the lack of education from part of the parents. So, like not sitting with their children and explaining why they have to do some things. Like it's kind of showing like that they need to educate themselves more to educate their children and let them know what's right and like know the difference from what's right to what's wrong, or like why they have to do some things.
Okay, so that's kind of interesting because what I'm hearing there is like, okay, if you're a parent and you yourself are fairly highly educated, so you're like you guys, right? You're getting up early in the morning to go to class, right? And have a big old discussion about people's motivation, how you become a parent, and all the social factors that give rise to this. So you live in a world in which you think about these things and you express your thoughts as we're doing right now, right? And then what happens is you spend enough time doing that, and that gets transferred over, right, to another context. So you get used to doing what we're doing right now, and you bring that naturally enough into the household. Is that maybe what you're saying?
Yeah.
That, by the way, okay, to get to the guy you're going to discuss, this Melvin Kohn, let me quickly tell you what he found out. He did research in the 1950s in Washington, D.C. He surveyed hundreds of families, and he determined whether or not he was going to call them working class or middle class. In the 1950s, working class meant you worked in the factories. Factory work made up, the manufacturing sector made up a huge portion of the workforce back then, about 20 to 25%. A lot less today, maybe closer to 10% at the most. Okay. Well, here's what he found out. Just on the basis of interviewing parents, what do you get upset at your child for? How do you punish them when you punish them, and so on? He found that, yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and you can't generalize too much, but, there's definitely a pattern. And if you're middle class, a lawyer, and he meant things like you're a lawyer, you're working in an advertisement firm, you're a teacher, you're a, you name it, okay? And you're more your boss on the job, okay, than you are somebody that takes orders from somebody else. He found that the parents from the middle class tended to have more of these give and take conversations with their kids. And the parents in the working class, and you'll read about this, your textbook says that, tended, to just be more concerned that their children obey the rules. Okay? We're not going to have a conversation about, so in other words, the middle class were more permissive in general. Okay? The lower class less so. And here's what he said. He said that their workplace environments parallel their home environments. So the way they act at work is reflected in the way they do parenting at home. So in the workplace, if you're middle class, you're used to making your own deadlines, coming up with your own projects, seeking out your own clients, right? You're much more self-directed. If you're from the working class on the, floor of the factory, you're mostly just worried about taking orders, production orders, work orders, and basically just fulfilling them and, being, a compliant employee. So you toe the line, okay? You do what you're told. And your success on the job depends on your ability to comply. So to me, the most interesting part of his research was this idea that somehow your social class occupation, whether you're a factory worker in the manufacturing sector or whether you're a middle class, worker, somehow that experience that shapes you and shapes your parenting style. And it probably does it in a way that you may not be conscious of, right? You're probably, as a parent, not saying to yourself, you know what? The way I do things at work, I'm going to bring into the household. I'm going to raise my children the way I interact with my boss or my employees. So it's interesting to consider that your social class position, your position in the workplace, may influence, unbeknownst to you, your own parenting style. And then my question that I asked in the discussion is, look, this was back in the 1950s. Do you think that's still kind of a valid observation? Do you think that's still a valid kind of thing today? I don't know if Darius's nod was like, yes, I do. Do you, by the way, or was the nod maybe?
Yeah, it was a nod agreeing with what you're saying. Isn't that like I can't pronounce his name, but it's like a ecological system theory.
Ooh, coming from like psychology or something, or?
Yeah, I think his name starts with like a B. It's like a like
Right.
biome burns something theory. Basically, it's like um a bunch of systems. You have like a micro system, macro system, and each one of these systems affects the way your child just affects the way your child as a whole. And that's one of the system is that like your parents' environment, like their political views or their job, they might have a bad day at work and then come home and then act different towards their child, and then that affects the way their child goes out into the world, or they might lose their job and then come home and things change for their child.
I would be, if you could find that reference, I would be really psyched if you were able to like put that like in the discussion, because I'd like to check it out myself, because it seems to fit perfectly what Kohn's central point was that there's this kind of unconscious sort of influence exercised by these parallel or adjacent regions, right? Yeah, so I mean that seems well fit for what Kohn was saying. Now, people have actually wondered whether or not his observations are still valid, like half a century later, given that there's been a lot of changes in the workforce, for one. So it could be that what used to be clear divisions between the working class on the one hand and the middle class on the other, maybe those have dissolved, right? And there's not such a clear. And also, if education does make a difference in your parenting style, education has become much more widely diffused, higher education especially. We're even taking classes where you hear about parenting style, right? Or you take child development courses, or you take social work courses, or what have you, and you hear about theories of development and parenting and so on. That could feed back into your parenting style, right? And to the extent that more and more people, okay, a larger proportion of parents have higher education experiences, maybe that breaks down older divisions between parenting styles. And so there aren't as clear distinctions in parenting styles according to class anymore. Actually, there was a researcher, just to finish up, there was a researcher who wondered that. And she went out and she tried to find out what she could through participant observation, observing households that gave her permission to go in and watch them interact with their children. Her own findings, her name is Annette Leroux, was that those old observations are still valid to this very day. And you still see, for reasons that Molly brought up, having to do with time and stress and those kinds of things, affect your language, your interactional style and your language, as well as, and that's clear.